Maybe I could do it this way. There we go. Alright, well that was incredibly inconvenient. I was gonna wrap it up today, but the ISP decided to cut out for like just long enough to interrupt and inconvenience me on my final statements. So that's a pretty good cue for me to head out today. And I'm probably gonna do this again in WaniKani. I don't know how that's gonna be different. But yeah. Probably these are one of the biggest statements that happen. The comparative things that happen a lot. Like, what is something better than something? Like, are children better than adults at learning language? Is Spanish easier than Japanese for English speakers? Is this product better than this product? I think it takes a lot of grain of salt, but I'm definitely open to, after saying all of that, obviously I wouldn't be saying most of these things if I am not open to trying it. So if it is possible and I have, I don't know, some open opportunity to experiment things, which can happen in the future, I'd be willing to give it a try. The downside is I can't be incredibly, not only I'm in a position where I can't be picky, but in the future I might have to be picky if that opportunity presents itself. But at the moment I can't be picky, or I don't technically have the luxury of being picky, largely because the projects that I do, I'll make them work largely. To prevent any like conflicts of interest, right? I brought up a specific product, a competing product, in a very general sense, often because that was the only Spanish product or self-learning product that was brought up in my 30 days plus of Spanish. So I will generally refer to the one that I'm familiar with at arm's length, right? Much like in Japanese, for Japanese, I mentioned WaniKani and Anki a lot because I read from them from a distance, and those are products you could use and share. So it's a setup for that. In HanziHero for Chinese, right? I can't mention too much about, for example, Chinese. Later, I'll mention it in HanziHero 7 days from now. Things like Du Chinese, right? Du Chinese and, I don't know, Chairman Bao and many other ones. In Japanese, I have things like Satori Reader. Can't do that. And then for Duolingo stuff, like things that are actually comparable, in my opinion, are far more apples to apples than things like Babbel, Pimsleur. I don't know what that thing is still called, like Rocket Language. And then there's one that someone I watch is sponsored by, and they have open applications for those. Maybe I'll consider them in the future, right? So that kind of sucks that this ending part is separated because of that 4-minute interruption in my ISP. But yes, so it's kind of a nice thing. This is what I typically do. I think I like where is it? I like this panel. We tried. We really tried to put in as many of the terms as possible. It looks nice. We'll use this as the thing, right? I mean, this slide is pretty good too. I liked how this one turned out as well. maybe I'll place this one for the broken videos, right? This one's probably gonna go up for the first one, and then we have an interruption. Now this one looks nice too. Anyways, so I'm gonna wrap up today. It's a shame that I don't feel like I'm not gonna stitch these two together, so apologize in advance if you're gonna watch like a bit of the end, but they're just gonna end up being the conclusion. So what do I want to conclude today? Spanish is great right now. We'll see. We'll see. It's very early days, and yet I have a lot of things to talk about already, right? It was many times dealing with a native speaker fallacy that happens quite often, where a native speaker is far more focused on sharing all their errors with me or all their fear with me, as opposed to telling me things that would interest me about Spanish. That's not everyone. The ones that stayed and the one that I talked to the most who speak Spanish, right? They shared things about Spanish. I think one of the things that really put me off quite often is how condescending or unintentionally condescending or underestimating as well some native speakers can be, not in the sense of it was intentional, nor is it not coming from a like it's coming from a kind place. However, it's so detached and distant. It tells me that they don't spend time, in my opinion, respectfully, teaching people most things. So what is something that I would say is very associated as a final like hot take or concluding remark about teaching and instructing and demonstrating things. When you spend more of your time trying to scare your student or scare anyone you're trying to help into using that as a deterrence to encourage them to do better, I think that's a telltale sign of projected emotions rather than something that is meant to be instructive. It's like saving your own pass, so to speak. So rather than focusing on encouraging and inciting the interest of the person, you decide to use FOMO, fear, and potentially hostility to forcing or gaslighting. Personally, it's borderline negligent and gaslighting and unintentional. Like some people say, well, you have to intentionally gaslight someone. It's like, it's kind of hard to not take it as intentional, right? In this case, like for example, the moment you hit a grammar point and you make an error and that person's like, oh yeah, that part is really, really tricky. Now, hear me out here. I'm a native speaker. And if you don't start doing this, you're gonna be sorry and you're gonna be working with that problem for the rest of your Spanish journey, for example. And that is actually putting it fairly lightly, in my opinion, because it's not said like that, but it sounds like that a lot of times. When a person comes up and say, oh yeah, I'm a Spanish speaker, I'm a Spanish native, haha, and then they're like, oh yeah, that's really tricky, you should do this. Like, that's really tricky, you should do this. Oh, if you don't do this, you're gonna mess up this. Oh, and don't forget that you need to do this, because if you don't, you're gonna sound weird. And then if you do this, then nobody says that, so you're going to sound weird that way too. So in my opinion, the last time I stepped into a classroom, I don't think the first thing the professor says is, hey guys, this is gonna be the worst experience you're ever gonna have if you don't follow my every word, because if you screw up now and you screw up, you can't undo it for the rest of your life. You still want to take my class? And I think that's a symptom or a normalization of being on the internet. Because if you don't scare someone into doing the thing you want them to do, somehow that's not an act of kindness. It's weird. That's probably the last hot take I can take away from most of my language learning journey. So most of last year and continuing to this year, it's very similar. I didn't think this part was going to change very much, where someone like hyper focus on telling you how you like shouldn't learn a language, as opposed to encouraging the person how they should be interested in a language. So yeah, I think that goes with the whole territory of a language being hard and a language being easy. And then when a language is being easy, oh, here's a big cut, but even bigger cut. When a language is really hard, it works double-edged, by the way. Let's go back to this. Oops. Are we? So let's go back to this little graph here. When the language is hard, it is perceived as a compliment for trying to do it. When a language is easy, people are going to try to convince you it's hard in order to make it look like an excellent accomplishment. It's such a weird world we live in today. And in the end of the day, I would spend hours, like I just did recently before the internet cut out, that I don't think of it as hard or easy. I don't think of it as hard or easy that way. I think of it as, how hard am I working? Because yeah, maybe I agree with you that English is really far from Japanese and English is really far from Spanish. But all I can see is, man, Spanish can be as hard as I want it to be, and Japanese can be as hard as I want to be right now, because not in neither case I'm going to ever maybe even bother thinking about mastery of either language. And even then, it's a logical fallacy to consider a mastery of a natural language that's being changed, especially in this context where Japanese is a trending language and Spanish is a rival in diversity to English in terms of its users. So, no, let's not focus on that. So, oftentimes, like, I actually think, and this is a common discussion. What's a common discussion on hot take? One hot take is, if you were to learn a language, do you exclude native speakers or include native speakers? This is my personal hot take. And should they have teaching experience? And you're going to get all sorts of combinations. You're going to have those people who anecdotally say, oh yeah, if I talk to a non-native teacher and a native teacher, I have mixed experience with those. Some people swear by native teachers, native speaking teachers, and some people swear by non-native speaking teachers. And they would argue like, well, if you're a non-native, then a non-native teacher would be able to relate to the pitfalls and the things and be able to empathize, etc., right? And ultimately, that's kind of how I feel about this whole vibing thing, this vibing comparison, affecting all of the process thinking. I would say, for me, probably both. Find out, maybe one day you'll feel like there's a deficit and you wanted a native perspective. And that person has to be someone who's capable of sharing instructive material that isn't a long list of normalized behavior of FOMO and fear. And then maybe one day you're just looking for a non-native who can share some experience with you, empathizing with you about your journey. All of the above. Because when adults decide to do things, it's multifaceted, in my opinion. And the person who decides these things tend to have agency over what they need or want if they're self-aware, if they're self-correcting. Otherwise, yeah, you can go and trust blind faith. And faith can work really well because it's also statistics. Like, you can make it and you can stack it in your favor. So you can stack it as hard and as easy as you want. Do you want the ideal case? Go for native teaching experience and hope for the best. If it turns out that the native teaching experience is not for you, go for a native, non-native things. I think constantly worrying about what is the best way to interact with a life's journey skill that involves all of the above is weird. Now, I wouldn't be saying this if I knew the other person's like, no, I'm moving to Japan, or I'm moving to Spain, and this is all I'm going to hear. It's like, okay, then go for that. It limits your choices, or your appropriate choices. Meanwhile, if you're on the internet, you're gonna be doing all of the above. So no, learning natively is a fallacy if you're going to be interacting with other people who you want to understand only, like we're talking about exclusively, like only interacting with native content and not interacting with non-native content or multilingual content, and then not investing again in how your language interacts with that language is not in my wheelhouse of goals. Like, you could be really, really great at a language and you can be an incredibly or unrelatable teacher. Because I talked about extraordinary people before the end. Extraordinary people are incredibly unrelatable. They're incredibly entertaining and awe-inspiring, but they are incredibly unrelatable. So teachers and instructors, or people who aren't professionally teachers, but they have personalities and skill sets that make them great advisors and teachers, are individuals who are relatable. So if you go around and someone tells you, yeah, I only speak to natives when I'm speaking Japanese, and I'm like, well, I guess we have nothing to talk about since I'm learning Japanese. And then, you know, the person was like, oh, no, but you're an exception. It's like, I don't think so. Because if you promptly say that you exclude people because of what they are, then I think that's far more candid than using a pleasantry to say you care. Like, for example, someone like comes up to you, how much of it, right? Grain of salt. But when someone says, oh yeah, nah, yeah, this video game's dub for English is terrible, right? And it's a Japanese game, for example. And I would ask them, so What do you watch anything in English, or do you play anything in English? Nah. It's Japanese all the time. It's like, so you don't know. And they would say something like, well, you know, the quality of it isn't the same as Japanese. I'm like, so you're gonna try to compare two languages, and one language you rarely hear or you have any background of exposure and you spend most of your time in that language, and now you're telling me that I can objectively, hopefully objectively and subjectively trust you that you have the basis of comparison. Did you vibe it? Is that how you do it? You vibe your comparisons in order to express something to another person. I think that's where we're going here a lot of times. Many comparisons and whatnot are vibed without understanding of the methodology. And it's not to the fault of people who are normalized to that, because when you see a product online nowadays, rarely is the methodology ever disclosed. There are some great channels that do disclose their methodology. And in fact, they started doing that because of controversy, right? And I think the tech channel section have a great example of that. They describe their methodology so that you can make an informed decision on what their comparisons are. Now, there's a problem to this as well. Those who vibe compare, even if someone discloses their methodology, it's a two-way street. It's a two-way street. Does that person want to pay attention to the methodology? I can assure you, I was one of those kids. It's not, I'm not glamorous as well. When I was younger and I was reading scientific articles, it is so hard to care about the methodology until the time I realized how important it is. Like, really felt how important it is. And that's when, surprise, surprise, when you have to conduct your own experiments from the ground up. So since you don't do that, so people don't do that, right? When was the last time you watched a video that said, I did this so you don't have to? Yeah, because you didn't. So if you continue to spend like 95% of your time to form opinions and comparisons by not doing things, then how could you possibly be reliable in doing comparative analysis, even meta-analyses? Right? I'm being a little harsh, a little bit harsh. But I don't think it's like a bad thing. It's an opportunity. One day it could be could be your best selling point. Like, someone asks you, oh, do you know if this is better than this? And I'm like, I don't. But hey, I have a great idea on how to figure out how and why, and I'll come back to you and explain it to you. Instead of saying, I don't know. Like, I don't know it. Maybe I'll just Google it and find out what other people say about it. It works. It saves time. It doesn't practice comparative analyses. Sometimes I think the last haven for learning these things now, scientific method, methodology, it's through obligation. And the last place for obligation nowadays is formal education. Because otherwise, no, you don't have to learn any of these things. You don't have to learn methodical comparisons or how to ascertain logical conclusions, right? You can say, well, lots of people say this and therefore it's true. With that said, I'm one person, so take everything with a grain of salt, right? I will continue to encourage converging evidence and divergent testing and null hypothesis testing, and maybe we'll come up with new things to talk about. With that said, I want to end on a special, like a more positive note, right? I think nowadays, looking for the best is awesome. However, if you want to do things, like especially volunteering things, and you love the thing, you don't have to worry about the best. You worry about how long you can do it and how much you can learn from it, and then find the next best thing, right? It's a work in progress. And if you love it, truly indeed you love it, I think the stuff intuitively will feed on itself. Voluntarily. The things you choose voluntarily, obviously. Obligation is a different story. So, go out there, do some stuff. Pick... I sound like a programmer at this point. Pick something that's bad, even. Pick something you love, but you know that this thing is bad, and challenge yourself to make it better. You'd be surprised. I would say more times than not, you'd be surprised how much you learn by trying to observe something that is suboptimal and optimizing it, or aka reinventing the wheel. Sometimes people take it even further up a notch and pick something that's good and try to make it better. I mean, that's fine too. Generally speaking though, that's probably for people who are trailblazing, and most of the time people are using the product. I think finding something that is maybe not that great and constructively making it work is going to elicit a type of problem solving that I think the internet has de-incentivized over the years. And that's kind of my jam, because in the way of being able to appreciate the things that are there and not there, and how they interact when they are there and not there, is great, because the vast majority of people only see what is there, and when it's not there, it doesn't exist. So, and somehow that's a point of comparison too. When things are not there, you can compare it. Like, well, sort of. You can say that the thing is not there, and then on the one hand, that's there, and therefore it's incomparable. Right? It's very easy to get into, quote unquote, lack of a better phrase, it's far less effort, in my opinion, to pick something that doesn't exist and pretend like that gives you information against something that does exist. That's not a form of comparison, it's a form of contrast. And that contrast can feed into a bigger picture, but you have to take into account that the absence of something is different from two things doing similar things, and you're measuring those two things. So if one thing doesn't have audio and you compare something to have audio, is it really better? You can't tell. The answer is there's nothing for it or against it. One exists and one doesn't. So yes, certainly it's very easy to say, well, one has it, so it must be better. I'm like, well, that's not logical. You don't know, because there's no comparison. You can say it exists and it doesn't exist, so therefore we can't compare these things. Maybe we can pick something else. You can compare the metrics. The readout are comparable, but the idea that the existence of one thing and not one thing, not quite the same, right? So go out there, stop comparing yourself to someone else, for example. I didn't grow up in a multilingual household. So obviously I'm going to have more trouble than a person who's growing up in a multilingual household. Man, do I wish I grew up in a multilingual household, because I can't learn a language as good as a multilingual person. That is the type of comparison that extrapolates to the absence and confirmation bias that I'm talking about. So if there's anything I want to leave on a positive note, is that type of comparison can suck the joy out of most things you choose to do. And it can start by viewing things not like that. Like, this person has money, I don't. That's unfair. For example. Right? So thank you very much. I'm gonna do this again tomorrow because it's WaniKani. WaniKani's 100 day, and I am not going to do a Duolingo Spanish day. So we're gonna take a leap day for Duolingo Spanish in order to free up time for WaniKani. And some of this stuff is gonna come back, but it's gonna be very different because we're gonna be focusing on SRS in the WaniKani thing. So again, apologies, my ISP decided to cut out for exactly 15 seconds in order to cause 2 videos, but hey, these are live streams, they're unedited. You're gonna have a 2-part thing. Thank you again for those who hung out or will hang out. If you're gonna sit through a 6-hour video, kudos to you. If not, run it on 2x speed, maybe something interesting will happen. I always welcome, as always, if you're gonna watch this later, muchas gracias. And you are always welcome to follow along, drop your hot takes, and be ready to discuss them. Because discussion breeds emergent properties, new ideas. And I certainly am very, very grateful for all the attention or times that I have this opportunity to interact with people. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Hasta luego.